So I just wanted to make a little public service announcement type of a thing. I don't know, whatever you want to call it, an ad for a product that is free and that did not sponsor me in any way. Linux is fantastic. I love Linux. I'm so satisfied at this point that going back to Windows, I think, would be more difficult than sticking with Linux and dealing with some of the issues sometimes that I have to deal with and some of the struggles. Um, and it's really hard to explain to someone in the Windows or Mac ecosystems that, you can use Windows comfortably. You can also use like Graphene OS and Android open source forks comfortably. They just work great. And you get so much of your privacy and so much control back on your computer. And I'm not super obsessed with, locking my life down level of privacy, paranoid level of privacy. But at the same time, I feel much more comfortable with a computer that I have control over and, where I know what's happening on it. And I know what's installed on it. I know what's running and I know how it fundamentally works. And I think that's something that Windows and Mac OS take away from you. And I think if you're using a tool, you should know how it works. I don't think we should be using tools that we don't fundamentally understand how they function. And I think computers and smartphones are no different. I don't think we should be living in a world of mystery boxes that we interact with. Now, to be able to program really effectively and write all your applications and be like a wizard, that not everyone needs to do that. But to at least be able to function and understand the functions of your computer and tweak it and make it your own thing, and also have the freedom to do that and the control to do that, I think is super important. And so, like, I've been running Arch Linux. I started this journey years and years ago, and I will say Linux on the desktop and on laptops has been a miserable experience for many years. I won't discredit that opinion. It's totally valid. It has been awful for a very long time. However, I will say it's come such a long way. Um, I started with a random desktop that I didn't know if it was compatible, and I made it work with Arch. It took about a day to get it all installed and set up the way I like it, and Windows takes me about the same amount of time to do everything I want to do because I got to download a lot of apps and install a lot of stuff and log into everything and make it all happy. And the thing with Arch now is that there's such good documentation online that you can sit there and it's like Wikipedia rabbit holes, basically. You install something more complicated, like let's say like Steam. So for Steam, you're going to need a graphics driver. So like you look up, okay, it says graphics drivers, and you click that, and then it says, okay, what graphics card do you have? Oh, you've got an NVIDIA graphics card. Boom, and it'll tell you, oh, how to identify what graphics card you have. Type this command. Boom, and it all explains everything to you and breaks it all down, and it helps you understand how it all functions. Um, and if you don't want to do all that, there's easier ways to get there. But I will say, actually, I feel like starting with something minimal like Arch, where you're building it all from scratch, it works better because you're learning for at a very granular level how everything is put together, and so it gives you a much better ability to troubleshoot when issues do arise, and they will. But I think the freedom is totally worth it. The liberty, whatever you want to call it, the ability to control your computer and your use of the computer is so worth it. And video editing is a prime example of something where it may be difficult for the average person to find a way to do it well. DaVinci Resolve works on Linux. There's a Linux specific build for of DaVinci Resolve that works on every distro pretty much. I use Kdenlive because I don't really do complicated video editing. But if I was going to spend money on a video editor, I'd probably just go ahead and buy DaVinci Resolve and put it on there. It's really not, it's like a no-brainer. Games are a big thing that people don't. Well, actually, okay, let's backtrack. Games, first of all, easy peasy these days. But let's talk about like productivity, basic productivity. You can do everything you could do on a PC on a Linux box. And you can also just run a virtual machine and run Windows inside of that and containerize it so that it doesn't have total control over your machine and just boot it up when needed. It might sound convoluted or extra, but I think, again, having that freedom to kind of control the monster and keep it in a little box that you don't have to always have open is great. And you will find that you don't need it that often. In fact, I don't have a virtual machine or even have a dual boot of Windows installed on this machine at all. I do not have Windows installed, and I don't need it. I use LibreOffice for my productivity. There's ways to install Microsoft Office using compatibility layers like Wine. Um, there's always a way around problems. It's just whether or not you're willing to invest the time to make it work. And they really are really good these days. I mean, the ways to get around this stuff, there's really solid guides for everything now. There didn't used to be. For many, many, many years, I kept switching to Linux, trying to get to where I was comfortable and happy with it, and there was always some, major bug that made it totally unusable and worthless, or several, back when I played games a little more often, I would, I'd install Discord and it was glitchy and terrible. I would install Steam and it was glitchy and terrible, and then I would try to install a game and it wouldn't really run properly, and so I give up. And everything else kind of worked. Oh, and Wi-Fi would have issues. Now I have a weird proprietary terrible Netgear USB NIC, wireless NIC, works great, no problems at all. Didn't even have to install a driver, just had to install like the basic firmware package, Linux firmware package, no problem. So literally, I was able to run through the Arch Linux install process on the wiki, and get it up and running in like, when I actually followed all the steps and like read it and actually followed everything and didn't skip any steps, it worked in like an hour. And then, okay, well, I want a GUI. So I installed GNOME because GNOME is really easy and GNOME packages up a lot of stuff that you're going to want anyway, like, I don't know, plugging in a hard drive. I experimented. I installed a really lightweight GUI, and it didn't have a lot of those type of features, and I hated it. And I just said, you know what, I want my computer to just work. So I installed GNOME, has everything I need. Plug in a hard drive, it mounts it. You install GNOME tweaks, and you can get it to look exactly how you want it to look and function how you want it to function. There's a few GNOME extensions you can install, totally customize it. I've got a nice setup where like I have an application menu, a places menu, and then a workspace menu, or a button, and then I have all the applications that are running, and it's all in the top bar. It's super clean and super comfy and like no clutter at all. I love it, and it's so quick too. The thing boots up in like 10 seconds, and I could run any game I want. There are some AAA titles I've heard that have issues. I don't play them. That's the thing. The rare game that I do play is usually like indie titles. That I will say, I'm probably an outlier in that regard. If with the gamers, but I don't encounter games I can't play. Haven't, at least for a long time. I think the last one I had issues with was Escape from Tarkov, and as far as I understand, they've basically fixed all those issues. So, if I wanted to play that again, which I probably won't, but if I wanted to, I could. Um, so games aren't really an issue. You can always run a Windows in a VM. You can run any other piece of software, and there's always open source versions of software available. And best thing of all, it's free, and you're free to do whatever you want with it. And there's no telemetry logging every single thing that you do and taking up valuable bandwidth. I'm on a pretty slow internet connection. I'm on Starlink, but it's like shared, and it hops to two different Wi-Fi repeaters, and it's kind of slow and terrible. It's not that great. But I'm able to use it effectively because I don't have my operating system doing so much crap in the background that I'm burning all my bandwidth and burning through a data cap, which is a real problem. I mean, and the fact that I think what really got me was that Windows would update itself and break itself, and that's in the corporate world. And I work with computers from a business perspective. It's really BS that your computer will break itself and you don't have any say in it. You have no control. That's terrible business. That my computer's forcing updates and I have no option to say no to any of them. And that they're bad, that they don't work. They don't even have a beta testing team. They just force updates on people. And they're like, well, you were the guinea pig and it didn't work for you, so we might pull that out of the stream and fix it or something. But you're going to deal with the experience of it sucking because we feel like we are a monopoly and we can do that to whoever we want. Even giant businesses, schools, Department of Defense, doesn't matter. You can just, force these updates on people and they'll just have to take it. And, you know, that combined with like saying, I have a data cap, don't do a bunch of BS in the background, it ignores those settings. It doesn't even care. Windows just does what it wants. And Mac OS isn't much better. It really isn't. Apple fanboys will say, oh, it's so much better. It's about the same. And the same for iOS and Android. It's like a black box. You don't have much control over it. You go with Android open source, at least you have some control. I would say the Linux phones aren't quite there yet, but they're getting there. And they'll be there eventually. But, for now, Android open source, fantastic. Like Lineage OS is a common one. I'm using Graphene OS on this device. Works great. Really comfortable with Linux and with the open source community, and I'm really grateful that it exists. And I'm grateful to have that freedom on my computer. And it kind of just goes, along with being like an off-grid person and a mountain man. You gotta have control over your life. That's like kind of a lot of the idea, right? Is to do it yourself and have control over your own life. And I don't really believe in the whole rugged individualist thing. And these operating systems, and then this software is very community driven. But I'm so grateful that it exists, and I say you should try it out. You'll love it. And you'll probably encounter some special thing that you do that's difficult to do on Linux, but it's always possible. It's just a matter of figuring out how to make it work. And the more people that use it, the more companies will put the energy into developing good packages for Linux. As people use it, it will, as it gains momentum and user share, you will see better software, and better implementation and easier to use software. That's why Ubuntu is a great intro for people, because you can just put it on a disk or put it on a USB stick, slap it in. Talking about disks, I'm aging myself here. You can put it on a USB stick, plug it into your machine, install it, you're good to go. And I think this whole thing of adding Linux to Windows is kind of bogus. I mean, I get why Microsoft is doing it. They see that Linux is valuable, they see it has a market share, and they want to, reel that in. I say go ahead and just install it on bare metal, man. What do you have to lose? I think there is Linux for the M2, the Mac Apple Silicon. I don't know a whole lot about that because I don't own one of them. But that might be one of the only situations where you're going to struggle a lot with this. But if you have an x86, an Intel computer, AMD, Intel, whatever, standard architecture, you won't have any problems at all. And I have a really old machine too. That's another thing. I still, despite computers being my kind of profession, although I'm starting to drift out of IT now. But despite that being my profession, I use a computer. Runs a 4770K, i7 4770K, with a GeForce 1080 Ti in it, and I think I have 20 or 32 gigs of RAM. Let's see here. We've got, does it not say? Oh, 16 gigs of RAM. I guess I took a stick out. I think I remember having a bad stick of RAM. So I have 16 gigs of RAM in here and a 10-year-old CPU almost. No problems at all. Not even worried about it. It's great. I love it. So I implore you, try Linux, give it a shot, put the energy into it. My main recommendations, if you're willing to dive deep, go with Arch. If you want something to just get you into it, Ubuntu, or I want to say Manjaro, but I would say if you want to go the Arch path, just go with Arch. Because I used Manjaro for a long time, and I loved it, and I thought, man, this is pretty good. But it always had some kind of problem. And as soon as I switched to Arch, I didn't have any of those problems because there's just package dependencies that are broken in Manjaro, and stuff about Manjaro that it just isn't quite right. But you switch over to Arch and you have none of those issues. So I would say either um, Arch or Ubuntu, absolutely amazing. Linux Mint is pretty good too. Linux Mint kind of looks and feels like Windows, but it's Ubuntu based. So, and I've also heard that modern Debian is pretty good, but I don't have any experience with modern Debian. I had a former coworker tell me I really should try Debian, and I haven't still. I'm already on the Arch path, and I just wanted to go that way. So, um, but yeah, try Linux. You'll love it. Promise.